I was asking in my mind to see something. These people were just leaving, and I was like, man, if I could just get one more before they leave. Like in my mind, right? I wanted them to see it. And then all of a sudden this thing appears, and we were all freaking out. So this idea of psionics isn't new. There's another crash where they had like headbands. The creatures were said to have headbands and would control the craft that way. The admission of a psionic asset, it was so revelatory to hear that in the context of the military, because that does seem like something conspiracy theorists or enthusiasts of ufology would suspect. It's just never something I thought we'd hear confirmed. Because I asked him, like, how do you notice a psyop, right? How do you prepare for a psyop? And first thing he told me was, if you think you're immune, then you're the easiest person to psyop.
Welcome back to the transmission, my friends. Yes, we're doing bangs and glasses today. That mundane daily miasma that we spend the vast majority of our time in, those beige daily status quo type doldrums, that can be a tough presence to shake. And I know I talk about this all the time, but it really is a clear and present reality that I think all of us are trying to wiggle our way out of on a daily basis. But one of my favorite ways to blast away that daily detritus is to remind myself that the mystery really is out there, and it really is available if we choose to tune into it via any number of methods whenever we want to. And to be less hand-wavy about it, some of my favorite ways to do that are to tune in to creators that are skillfully gesticulating toward that mystery in a really undeniable way. That's certainly what I'm trying to do. And that's absolutely what Chris Ramsay is doing with his just peerless channel, Area 52. I mean, the man is making some of the best, if not the best, content on the UFO phenomenon, on psi phenomena in the whole digisphere. His production value is goals. It is top tier. It is inspiring. But on top of that, Chris is also a seeker himself. He was also initiated at the Monroe Institute. He gets out there. He experiments with his consciousness via a variety of methods. And whenever I encounter a dish like that, I know I've got a kindred spirit on my hands. I really wanted to bring that dish metaphor home, and I failed. Just a few days ago, actually, Chris and I just caught our first all too brief meat hang does not sound good. Meat space hang, molecular local communion. That doesn't sound particularly good either. We hung out in person at South by Southwest, and it was a good time. This mind meld bounces around some of my favorite topics that I think are amongst the most novel in the zeitgeist right now. The testimony of UFO whistleblower Jake Barber, psionic assets, these psychically gifted people who are apparently communing with non-human intelligence at the behest of intelligence agencies, defense contractors, the military, allegedly. We also riff on consciousness, psi phenomena more broadly, and the UAP phenomena in general. All the links that you'll need for Chris, Area 52, and Third Eye Drops are in the description. Do some altruistic algorithm tickling for me, won't you? Like, subscribe, comment, share. I would really appreciate it. Also, subscribe to Third Eye Drops wherever you listen to pods. We've got hundreds and hundreds of mind melds with some truly brilliant beings. I and hundreds of other seekers would also love to have you in our Wonder Lodge over at patreon.com/Third Eye Drops. Upon joining, you will gain access to a patron-only Discord server, access to a huge back catalog of patron-only content. You can join in on Zoom hangs, book clubs. You can get rewards like stickers, pins, shirts, and more. I really would love to riff with you there, but presently, let's do so with my man, Chris Ramsay. It is truly unbelievable how much has transpired in this whole, I guess, broadly UFO, UAP conversation just since we spoke last at the end of November. It's like The novelty is just breakneck and unpredictable. I mean, predictable in some ways, but unpredictable in other ways. And you're definitely one of my favorite people on the planet to talk about this with. So I'm excited, man.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Michael. As are you. It's always fun getting to hear your deep and thoughtful insights on on all of these subjects, whether it's the astral stuff or the psionic stuff, which is now really relevant, or both, or maybe they're one and the same. Who knows?
Well, appropriately, that's precisely where I was going to go with you off the bat, because you and I are both uniquely positioned at the nexus of that conversation as people who have explored the whole Monroe path, the going out of body, non-local consciousness stuff to varying degrees. Um, and the timing for me was weirdly, almost disturbingly synchronistic in the wake of going on that Monroe retreat myself, because, I'm coming off that. I'm reading the paper, I'm reading Monroe's books. Then suddenly you have this modern manifestation of almost exactly what Monroe and his whole ilk were talking about, directly aligned with the UAP conversation, primarily through the revelations dropped by Jake Barber. So, I mean, what was your thought? I mean, just starting there, what was your thought when you heard this term psionic asset? What did you think?
Yeah, the honestly, it was very striking to hear asset.
Yes, right.
The psionic part I kind of understood. And, that's a sci-fi term that was around, I think, in the 50s, and it meant, interfacing your mind with technology, and that you would require that's psionics. So it's different from just psychic ability because it's the interfacing of tech. That's where psionic comes in. And that part, I was like, I've always sort of thought of that. And a lot of people who've even Philip Corso, had mentioned that the beings were essential to the controlling of the crafts. They were part of the mechanism, right? And so we were already talking about, and I believe it was in Aztec, the crash there. There's another crash where they had like headbands. The creatures were said to have headbands and would control the craft that way. So this idea of psionics isn't new, but the admission of a psionic asset, or the reference to a psionic asset, was new for me. It was so revelatory to hear that in the context of the military, because that does seem like something conspiracy theorists or enthusiasts of ufology would suspect. It's just never something I thought we'd hear confirmed,
right,
like that in that category. So, to hear that was really surprising, these psionic assets. So instantly you're like, oh, okay, so we're training people much like we train them in artillery or recon or anything else, but we're training them through a militarized lens to use psychic ability to interface with these craft. I mean, that is like, it's mind-blowing to anyone who hears that. So yeah, I was shocked, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was shocked, but at the same time, it's so logical, and it has been implied in so many ways, because there was this extant conversation between, the nature of consciousness and some kind of psychical link between the craft and the pilot, or even people just looking to some people have issues with the word summon or connect, right?
I was just thinking of that, yeah.
Yeah, using, CE5 or whatever version of a protocol you want to call it or want to use, and for people that don't know about this, it's some variety of people gathering together with the express intention of psychically reaching out to the skies, basically, to make something appear, orbs, crafts, consciousness, whatever. So it does make sense that there would be some kind of internalized methodological effort on the part of intelligence agencies, military, contractors, whatever, who are looking to commune with it for whatever reasons, whether they be totally benevolent or with an agenda. And man, the other part of this too is you and I, as enthusiasts of the history of all of these psi-facing programs, like they all officially go dark in like 95 or whatever, after Congress really reams the intelligence agencies and demands transparency. And we learn about MK Ultra, we learn about Project Stargate, and all of its subsidiaries. And then that eventually manifests in this, like, the gateway document being declassified and all of that stuff. But to anybody who has like a single brain cell, right, it's like, okay, if this shit works, there's no way they've stopped doing it. They're just going to they're going to bury it in a deeper, darker project, or use different terminology, or hire a
They've
new
done that
contractor.
before.
Right, exactly.
Center Lane, Sunstreak,
Grill
what was
Flame.
the other one? Grill Flame.
Yeah.
Those were all related to Stargate. They all did the same exact thing, and they just kind of rebranded them every time.
Yeah. And then, bro, another just synchronicity coming off the heels of that. I think I texted or DM'd you, right after this happened, because it was just, it felt like such a weird little wink or mooning from the universe or whatever, where I'm just like sitting on my couch about to go to bed, and I'm scrolling through YouTube, and I see Project Stargate in all caps with like Trump and the guy from Oracle and Sam Altman, starting this new AI megacorp, and for whatever reason calling it Project Stargate. Is just like, what what is happening?
Yeah, is that related? Is that a way to cover up people's Google searches? Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe a little too late for that, but it sure is interesting to think along those lines. I'd similarly, not to get off topic, but I thought about the Steven Spielberg movie coming out, which is called Disclosure now, which used to be The Dish. And we all know it's about UFOs, and now it's being called Disclosure. Well, try Googling UFO disclosure in a year from now and see where that takes you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's like the cat is so far out of the bag, though. It's like, this shit is so mainstream. The Barber video, like, granted, you and I are in a echo chamber, but it seemed like that was all anybody was talking about for, weeks on end after the fact. Millions of people viewing it, clipping it, sharing it on social media. And we've really, I don't know if it's fair to say we've reached a critical mass in this now, but when a new significant whistleblower steps forward, it's significant news. It's getting traction in a way that is almost concerning in some ways, from like if you wanted to take the
Psyop route.
The super jaded astroturfing, like, sort of take on all of this. One could.
I still do. I still hold that, in the back of my mind. Part of that is from being a magician, but also, as magicians, we call it having an out. And so if I'm performing and I'm doing something, let's say, that requires some form of psychological manipulation or some type of suggestible action, and I have to count on you to do something, and it has to seem like it's from your own volition, that can be risky.
Yeah.
So a magician will always have outs, as we call them, which means if you don't do exactly what it is I want you to do, or choose the card or say the thing that I want you to choose, I will have an out, and I'll keep that in my back pocket. But you don't know where I'm going, so you don't know that that isn't the way that I intended the trick to go in the first place when I use that out, right? And I sort of reserve that for this type of stuff. And recently, I spoke to a friend, Hakeem Isler, who, by the way, we could talk about this in a bit if you like, but he's organizing Psy Games.
Oh, yeah, I saw that. I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a bit, but not to get too off topic, but he used to work for, he used to be Psyop for the military.
And really?
He filled me in quite a bit on that as well. Like, one thing you have to look out for, because I asked him, like, how do you notice a Psyop, right? How do you prepare for a Psyop? And first thing he told me was, if you think you're immune, then you're the easiest person to Psyop.
Totally.
So to know that you don't have everything figured out is where you want to be, where your headspace needs to be in order to learn, to grow, which is a perfectly good headspace to be in. But most people just don't have, they kind of want, to have everything figured out so they can get on with their lives, which is fine. But he's saying that, yeah, you got to keep that open mind to make sure you're not being co-opted psychologically. But then also what they do is they look for hooks.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you're planning a psyop, which is like a long-term thing, which a lot of people in the UFO space say, there's maybe a psyop going on. There's psyacts, which are like the individual things that you do, and then the psyop, which is like the long-term thing. And they plan this all out, and then they look for hooks. So a hook is something that you do maybe unconsciously, something that you can't get away from. For some people, that hook is food. For other people, it's, a relationship, maybe a toxic relationship that they can't get away from. But those hooks, they know you're always going to go back to that. So playing on those hooks, they can induce emotion, right? So for instance, if I start speaking to a group of people who all believe in one God or the other, and I start saying from a passionate perspective that I was touched by the hand of their God.
Right.
And I'm emotional and I'm crying and I'm showing them that it's real. Now I'm hooking them because it's what they believe to be true. It's their hook. Right. And I'm attaching my narrative to that. Once I'm in, I can say other things that you'll attach yourself to. And that's how it works.
Totally.
So part of me, when I see Jake Barber and I hear about, his story, part of me is like, this is amazing that he's being vulnerable and he's sharing this. He was almost in tears during that Ross Coulthart interview. And he's saying, this took over me and all of this, and it felt genuine. It really did.
So as I get closer to this pick site, I start feeling odd. I start feeling extremely emotional. And the closer I get, the more the emotion starts to overwhelm me. I feel this intense hybrid of sadness and happiness and beauty. I felt like something was inside of me. I felt like I was possessed by the most beautiful spirit I'd ever been possessed by. And
was it loving?
It was loving. But there was a sense of sadness at the same time. And
had you ever had an experience like this before?
No, it was a very feminine energy, I'll tell you that. It felt like the spirit of God, but not in any masculine sense.
But the other part of me is, allegedly, he's still or has been being paid by Northrop Grumman, which came to light last week.
Yeah, I heard that mentioned in a pod. Yeah, but what's weird is he specifically, Sheehan seems to be connected. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yes.
But they're connected somehow. Like he represents him or they're doing an event together that I saw later. So I'm confused.
Yeah, there's a lot of connection, especially when it comes to money and funding, right? So you always have to look at, okay, Skywatcher, who's funding this? And although the agenda might be pure of heart from one man's perspective or from the forward-facing optics, we look at it, we're like, oh, this seems like it's all good. Behind the scenes, they could be using that information and possibly weaponizing it on another front, right? So being aware of that doesn't mean discrediting it or discounting it, but I can't help but keep that in the back of my mind when I see, for instance, on the Super Bowl, they had a Pfizer commercial, and it was this small boy who had cancer, and he was like a boxer, and it was all emotional, and he beat cancer, and his parents were there, and like, of course you want this kid to win, you want him to beat cancer, and
totally,
you didn't sell me on anything. You're saying cry for this little boy, and then think of us, right? And so to me, that is a psyop against their own people, but we mislabel it and call it marketing.
Oh,
but
totally.
You're manipulating people's emotions.
Unfortunately, forgetting the name of this figure now, but he is directly the father of modern advertising is directly related
Yeah,
to
Edward. I'm forgetting the name now. Edward. I just, you know what? I just looked it up there. So Sigmund Freud, his nephew,
yes.
Edward Bernays.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Edward Bernays took Sigmund Freud's work, developed modern propaganda, wrote the book
Right.
Propaganda, then after the war, took all that information, put it into marketing, applied it to marketing. But get this, the co-founder of Netflix is Bernays' great grandnephew.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
We're hitting all the red flag demonetization buttons already. We're naming defense contractors.
But
we're calling out.
It is true. That's all.
Yeah.
You can Google, you can chat GPT that. Have a look for yourself. They're directly related.
And there are
so synchronous maybe or purposeful. Who knows?
Well, and there are like direct. And I'm not the first one to say this. I mean, I think Alan Moore might have had a whole graphic novel about this, or somebody else did, but essentially talking about the sort of psychomagical relationship between advertising and the human mind, and the fact that really what we're talking about is just another form of like another form of attempted mind manipulation at a distance through emotions, through archetypes, through symbols, right? Like what, like so many companies use literally
Sigils.
esoteric. Yeah. Right. Yeah. But anyway, getting back to the more primary topic at hand of psionic assets.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we've like reintroduced this relationship of psi and the UFO phenomena in general, I feel like this raises so many other new questions. Some of them, I do want to actually go back to you being a magician and what your unique POV from that perspective is on all of this, because there's some huge overlap there. But before we do that, there's this gaping question of, okay, there's a fork here, right? On one hand, this is all fantastic because anybody can potentially go prove this stuff to themselves. They can go have experiences. They can go call to these things, manifest these things. Great. On the other hand, if that's true, why don't we have 1 million eggs? Why don't we have a million 8 guns? Why isn't this just so simple? Like there could be thousands of people making crafts land right now. So where's the disconnect?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a difference between interacting with something that's in low orbit and then having that be in front of you on the ground. So from I'm just looking at it from like a practical perspective, but it seems like, especially in the interview that Ross Coulthard had with Jake, the initial one, or the one that they posted on their YouTube after
the long form.
They showed an image of some type of microwave gun.
Oh yeah.
Right. It was like a giant cannon type deal made by a company. And I looked into that. The CTO of the company he used to work for Raytheon, and like there's this whole connection there. But essentially what it seems to me to be is that these assets will bring them in the vicinity to where now these microwaves can target them. Because I don't think, and I also, because I there's two ways of thinking here. Either one, and this is like probably like 5 years ago when I was watching one of Stephen Greer's documentaries about interfacing or interacting with these crafts. Instantly, I was like, well, what you're saying sounds to me like we have the capability of hijacking these things. What makes you so sure that we're asking them to come? Because in CE5, one of the protocols, or one of the things that you're doing is, while you're focusing, is you're actually mapping from space. You're trying to get into the craft. You're trying to see the beings and ask them, and then now you're showing them where you are, much like a Google map when you zoom in. And so to help you with this protocol, you would actually go to Google and zoom into where you are to see what that looks like. Right, and sort of map that out and keep that in your mind so you can give them a clear image of where you want to be. But for me, that also feels like what you would do if you were steering the craft using psychic connection.
Right.
You know, and if you have, maybe our individual minds are too meager to pilot one of these things, but maybe collectively with the right tuning of heart, mind, or whatever, we might be able to collectively, if we're all doing the same thing and all zooming in on the same thing,
Right.
to actually just take control of these crafts and commandeer them. And then, once they get too close and the connection's lost and then everybody's like, whoa, look at that craft. All of a sudden it leaves because it's like, hey, whoa, what happened? That's one option.
Yeah.
The other option, which I think is more likely, is we don't summon them, but we kind of say, hey, do you want to come? And they willingly do so, because you'd expect, if they have that type of technology and everything else, like you got to be in the right mind state for them to show up. If they can feel whatever you're doing, hear whatever you're doing, know what you're going to do before you do it, they're not going to show up if you have any ill intent. That's what I think. But then again, who knows? If they're bringing them down, maybe they're fallible too. I don't know.
Yeah. Other than your time with Ryan Bledsoe, where you had the express intention of going out there and hopefully seeing something. And by the way, in that instance, was there any, okay, let's like sit and focus and really try to get in a certain, consciousness channel here, or was it really just hanging until something showed up, or what was the grammar of that?
The intention, I think, was always to have something show up, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think we had a very playful energy coming into it. There wasn't, Chris Bledsoe likes to say, cut the football chatter.
Right.
As in like, all right, stop filling the air with words. Let's focus. Although we didn't do that explicitly, it felt like we were doing that on our own sort of at moments, because we were all intending, like when I filmed that one just sort of appearing, my camera was pointed towards the ocean. I was hoping to see something. I was asking in my mind to see something. These people were just leaving, and I was like, man, if I could just get one more before they leave, like in my mind, right? I wanted them to see it. And then all of a sudden this thing appears, and we were all freaking out. It got super bright. It was very cool. Now, hindsight's always sort of acts like it's 2020. So you're always self-doubting, and is that some type of jet afterburner? Were they doing like war games out there? I don't know, but it was very synchronous regardless. And I think, whether or not you believe it's a UFO or not, I'm not smart enough to know the difference, to be honest.
Yeah.
But the feeling I got was, I'd like to imagine the same feeling as if it was extraterrestrials. And I think I conveyed that feeling in video. And I think the people who watched the video also felt a small portion of that. And so I think it served its purpose. That synchronous moment served its purpose. Although maybe not a real UFO, I think the purpose it served through the video and through reaching people and telling story in that way, I think was meaningful. I think that kind of happened for a reason. So,
Are you leaning toward it being more not real, or are you still just undecided? Or toward?
It doesn't matter where I lean. Like, that's the thing. Like, I can lean either way. I'll never know. And I'd love to believe, and sometimes I let myself believe that it was extraterrestrials or something, right? And other times I let myself believe that it was some type of training exercise that was happening simultaneously.
Yeah.
I'm not going to commit. I just don't have it in me to commit, but I don't see the harm in being non-committal. As long as my mind remains open, as long as I'm not completely closed to the idea, I think that's totally fine.
I feel like I would know if the answer was yes and anything remarkable happened at this point, since we've had a few conversations. But have you tried expressly to summon a UFO or a craft or an orb any other times?
The only other time that I've done it was I was in the Bahamas last year, and I was in a balcony, and I just got through Chris's book, I think. And I was staring up at a patch of darkness in the sky, and the stars were out, and it was right by the Big Dipper. And I was just staring at this, And I was throwing my loving intention, literally like just sending love out to this one spot. And I was like, come on, if there's something there, just show me. And this little thing, just like this orb, just kind of like, I say orb, a light, kind of pulsated and then went away. It didn't move or anything, and it was gone. And I was like, oh.
Yeah.
And I asked again, and there it was again, boom, and it pulsated, and it was gone. Again, at the exact spot I was looking. I did this for 3 nights in a row, and I kept going to that spot. And in my head, I was like, oh, I can't wait to like see my friend later. And it was just like a personal thing that I had to myself, and I was like, oh, this is going to be cool if they show up again. Again, what is that? Is that a reflection of a satellite that I'm simultaneously viewing at the same time that I'm projecting my thoughts out there? Would it have happened regardless of me projecting my thoughts? These are all questions I don't know, but the feeling, regardless, is that one of which that feels special.
Yeah.
So I think that's really all that matters, isn't it?
I don't know, man. I in some ways, yes, but in other ways, like, I want to know, to the extent that I can know, I want to try to get closer and closer and closer to that truth. Like, even something like there's a pretty large gulf, I would say, between an experience like what you were just describing and then something like an OBE, right?
Yes.
Where the OBE is just like, it's about as real as getting smacked across the face with a 2x4, right? It's like, it fucking happened.
Mm-hmm.
Now, could we still make reductive, more, materialistic, neurology-based arguments for what that is? Yeah, we could. But that's a different kind of thing. And I guess this points to one of the most mysterious but also vexing things about being interested in UFOs, UAPs, orbs. That mystery is that I don't even know what Occam's razor is. I don't even know what the most parsimonious answer is. Like,
Depends
is
on
it,
your belief.
is it more likely that it is that, or is it more likely that it is something prosaic or just, I don't know. Because if you, the last thing I was going to say is, there's part of, I'm simultaneously reading that Phenomena book by Annie Jacobs and Time Loops by Eric Wargo, which is another weird synchronicity because I didn't expect those books to have so much overlap. But one of the two of them talks about the problems with trying to apply statistics to these things, because there really is, like, people will just throw out a statistic based on a certain assumption. But the problem is there is no control, right? There is no control group or experimental setup that really allows you to reduce the field of possibilities. So if something out there happens in concert with a conscious intention, like, for instance, you wanting to see something, like, you can't construct odds or statistics around that, right? Like that's one of those things that annoys me when people try to, reduce strange phenomena to like, oh, well, statistically, everybody's going to have at least one dream. It's, the law of large numbers or whatever. But it's like, nah, like, these are all constructs. Like, these are all just things people sitting around jerking off to spreadsheets made up at some point. Like, it's, there is no data set. There is no map that actually accurately reflects the territory of reality and the mysteries of consciousness.
That's right. And no matter the number, it won't sway anyone to believe something so unbelievable.
Yeah.
You can have the most elevated p-value in history and they still won't believe in remote viewing or precognition or whatever it is, unless they experience it themselves, because it's such a jarring, paradigm shifting moment, event that you're like, well, unless it happens, there's no way that you can completely fathom that reality or what it's like to live in a reality where that is true unless it happens to you. There's just no way. So I get tired of where's the data, where's the evidence? Because like if we're talking about precognition and we're talking about remote viewing, there is data, there is evidence, and there's peer-reviewed study. There's actual peer-reviewed study on both of those things that you can have a look. In fact, there's 30 years studied 6 remote viewers over 30 years, and the p-value is quite literally way past the bar where it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the goalpost keeps getting shifted because people just can't seem to come to terms with that being a reality. So, you know, at one point, you're right. You can't keep, looking at all the data. But again, at what point would you consider yourself a believer, a true believer? Like, what would that take? And I often ask myself that question.
Mm-hmm.
And initially, you go, well, if they landed right in front of me and came out of their ship,
Yeah.
right? But then you go, was I having a psychotic break? Was it the government? I know hypnosis exists, and I know you can get away with a lot during hypnosis. Was I being hypnotized? Was I awake? Was this some psyop? Is this right? So I don't think that'll ever really leave. I think it's a choice to believe, but belief itself doesn't dictate nature of reality. It only dictates your perception of it. And if you want to have a perception of reality that's a little bit more magical, you can choose to believe. And if you want to have one that's a little, less romantic, a little more prosaic, then you can choose to withhold some of that belief and, and live there. When you said, is there a prosaic explanation to this? That's depending on who you're asking. If you're asking a ufologist who's maybe a lifelong abductee and has studied UFOs forever, seeing a triangle in the sky might be prosaic.
Yeah.
It might be unromantic. It might be something meh to them, right? Or someone like who worked at the UAP task force. They're completely saturated from seeing video of UFO. They've seen so many. You show them any and they don't go, wow. They go, oh, okay. So that's prosaic to them. It's still extraterrestrial potentially, but it's still prosaic. It's still an explanation that is unromantic, that is not magical, So it really depends on what your perspective is. And that's, I think, the only thing that really matters. And the more you tie it back to the quantum world and the more you observation is everything. It's all about perspective. Nothing else matters. Really, nothing else matters. It's all about how you see reality and what you choose to see. Yeah.
Yeah, there are stories from that Phenomena book that are just mind-blowingly, again, just open so many questions and really. So here's one example that I was listening to this yesterday when I was driving. So some of the details are a little blurry to me, but I remember it's in chapter 11 of Phenomena, if anybody's reading along for the book club or whatever. And there's this circumstance where some of the guys from SRI, put off Targ, and one of the remote viewers, I believe, are also interacting with these other scientists from like a rival institution.
From Russia?
No, they're like neighbors. They work on like specifically nuclear stuff at this site. And I believe what they were doing, I think they were trying to do an experiment with some of the remote viewers to see if they could, affect something at a distance. And they needed an unbiased third party to measure the results or something like that. I could be blurring stories together here, but the punchline to this is, I think they're talking about the quote unquote Geller effect, because weird shit seemed to follow Uri Geller around. And again, I could be mixing like 3 or 4 stories from this book, but what ends up happening is some of these guys who are nuclear scientists have the highest possible top secret clearances, right? Their mental health is closely monitored at all times. One of the guys and his wife wake up in the middle of the night, see what appears to be a luminescent, rotating, glowing arm at the foot of the bed. Some of them are experiencing like poltergeist activity. Some of them are just having all kinds of weird, unexplainable shit happening to them. And Annie Jacobson, she really kind of just does a good job of reporting all of this stuff in a way that's pretty warm to all of this stuff, at least so far, being very real, and there being a huge preponderance of evidence to that conclusion. But in this case, interestingly, she seems to be hinting at that there may be some advanced technology things going on here. And I mean, and this is already implying things like today we would consider anomalous aircraft and holographic projections that we definitely do not have access to at a consumer level, even like 30, 40 years later or whatever. So I'm just rambling here, but this is just one of those things where it's yet another example of what even is Occam's razor, or the most parsimonious explanation there. Is it some super advanced black technology that's being used to fuck with these scientists because now they're like, oh, now you're going to come play in our pool with the CIA where we play with psychic stuff? Well, we're going to mess with you now because we have access to these things. Or is it genuine paranormal phenomena? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like Occam's razor always has a limit.
Right.
That we're not willing to accept anything else. Right? So there's a limit to Occam's razor. Like the fundamental limit of Occam's razor would be psychology.
Yeah.
If it's not a satellite, if it's not a flare, if it's not reflection or swamp gas, if it's not a hologram, if it's not tech, you're insane. It's a mass hallucination. And it ends there, right? So that's what we've been seeing with Occam's razor. And that's the reason why it doesn't apply to this space, because you can't use it in this space, because the phenomenon is just not an option. It's not on the table with Occam's razor until, everyone's aware of it being a thing. We just can't apply Occam's razor to it. That being said, I'm reading through the Lacerda files right now, which is a whole other. Yeah.
I saw your thumbnail pop up. I haven't watched it yet, but
yeah, it's wild stuff. Probably complete fiction, but
yeah,
even in these LARPs, there tends to be sometimes a seed of truth, and especially if this is concocted by some agency. If you would assume that this agency did make a story up like this, they would sprinkle some truths in there. So when you say, oh, these reptilians living underground and whatever, you're like, this is crazy, and you just throw it all out. But you've also simultaneously threw out the idea that something's living underground. So maybe that therein lies the truth, that there is something under there, whatever it is. So I look at it from that perspective. And one thing they said, this Lacerda, this reptilian female who's being interviewed during this, she says how they do mimicry, they perform mimicry, and that's how they get by in everyday life. And the way she describes it is that humans were made by this other species, this other humanoid species, millions of years ago. They were genetically engineered, and that there's a switch in our brain, a switch that you can access through telepathy. It's very easy. It's very baseline, but they put it there on purpose. Other alien species have discovered this switch in humans and can also manipulate it. And that switch basically is, see me as one of your own. And that's what they've been using. So there's all this, like, this idea of mimicry and this idea of, like, they look like us, and some people not seeing that and being like, that motherfucker is not real. Remember that video and like all this stuff, right? So it's very interesting. And then I thought,
great schizophrenic fuel too.
Yes, absolutely. And I thought, well, that's way more plausible than your skin actually chameleoning its way into a human is changing your perception of me in your mind. And so I never thought of that. And she started saying we have technology that does this for our craft. So instead of actually making light bending technology that goes around the craft, they have this thing in the craft that interfaces with our minds that tells us nothing's there.
Right.
And that creates a blind spot in our minds. And I thought that's such a cool way to talk about technology, because in an Occam's razor lens, it would be far less effort to manipulate our puny mortal minds than to create, gravity altering and dimension altering technology.
Yeah.
All I have to do is mess with your perception of it, and then that's it. And that's something that can be done through hypnosis. So I've hypnotized people before,
Really? Okay.
for entertainment purposes, not for regression or anything like that. It was like, your feet are stuck to the floor. You lose the ability to remember the number 3. You forget your own name, that type of deal. And it's for entertainment, and it works, and it's wild. It's mind blowing. It feels like a superpower when you do this. It's very dangerous because it's a slippery slope. But then you get these people in these states, and you quickly realize, and there's a lot of books on this, you can manipulate all of their senses, and the only limit is your creativity.
That's so crazy.
So I could take you outside and make the sky pink. I could make it so that you can't see my eyes. I could make it so you can't hear a certain pitch of sound, or that you can't feel me when I touch you.
Ooh.
Or that you can't taste, or you can taste. There's even something that this was done in the 30s. They were experimenting with hypnosis, and they took some people into a room, and they gave them. Have you ever seen Hook, the movie?
Oh,
Hook
yeah,
with Robin Williams. Do you know when they take off the food and there's
Mhm.
like empty bowls of steam? Everybody else is like scarfing down food and he can't see it, and it's so weird. And then he sees it, and then he can eat.
Yeah, it's like
When
all
he
this
becomes-
cartoon food that's like
Yeah.
blue and pink. Yeah.
It looks delicious, but he couldn't see it at first, and then he could see it. So they did a similar experiment where they would bring empty plates in front of people that were hypnotized and tell them, "Hey, you have time to eat before our next experiment. Go ahead and chow down." And they would sit there, and on camera, they would just eat. They were like, nom, 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 eating. Not only would they eat, they measured their bowel movements. They had actual bowel movements. Physiologically, they were being changed by suggestion.
Yeah.
And they were full. And then when they were full and they actually ate, they made them hungry again, and all of this. So you can quite literally play with people's senses in that way. And there's a lot of work the CIA did on that as well, especially with MK Ultra and all that stuff. You don't actually have to take mind altering drugs in order to change someone's reality. It's quite simple.
That's crazy.
Take that,
man. Yeah.
apply it to tech, and maybe that's some of what we're seeing. Maybe our perception of certain things are being altered, or a veil is being lifted at a certain time, or I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Now this is like a perfect segue to get into some of those questions I had for you around your perspective as both a magician and someone who is genuinely interested in this psi stuff at the same time. Before we go there, though, this supposed document with the reptilian, is it Lacerda?
Yeah.
From the mattress, the French version of the mattress company.
It's also a name of a type of lizard, I think.
Perfect. What do you know when that supposedly, or when did that surface?
1999.
Okay. So that was way after. I was going to say, because that evokes part of one of the core stories Benowitz is involved with like all that Dulce bass stuff.
Yeah. And David Icke as well.
Yeah. I can't remember the guy now, but I watched a video on this fairly recently. But do you know that whole story?
Richard Doty,
the Dulce bass stuff.
Yeah. What's his name?
Is it the guy
Bill Cooper?
The guy who got his fingers blown off and stuff?
Yeah. I'm blanking on his name right now.
Yeah, me too.
I don't know why I'm blanking on his name. Suggestion again.
But anyway, Benowitz is tied up in that too. But yeah, one of the parts of that story is that this guy who's a contractor, supposedly at this extremely secret base that goes like deep underground. And he actually had for people that are just like, this sounds like the most unhinged, like nonsense bullshit. This guy actually had like some of his fingers blown off. He had wounds on his body from this story.
Phil Schneider.
Yeah.
There we go.
Like part of this was he was working at this super secret base. He was helping them drill and blow holes in this mountain range to make this underground base. He claims that he went deep down there with like all of these special forces guards, and underneath there were these like alien or reptilian beings that they had like an open conflict with, and then he got wounded. It's a crazy, completely batshit sounding story that I could almost not tell without laughing. But at the same time, it's like, how'd you get those wounds, like those weird wounds that you had on your body? And then he died very strangely and untimely as well. So there's always that's one of the best ways to make a crazy story sound a lot less crazy.
Yeah, exactly. But there's definitely, there was the whole documentary, Miracle Men,
Mirage Men.
That's it. Yeah. Talking about the Psyop.
Oh yeah.
Basically, that was
yeah, what they
Cody
did
was a part of,
oh
and what they did to Paul and Linda Moulton Howe.
Yeah.
It's rather insane, but also, part of me is like, a perfect Psyop, if you can introduce reality into there and then come out as like, oh no, it was a Psyop. And now anytime you mention underground reptilian looking, you sound insane.
Yeah.
You sound like you're not ahead of you sound like you're not informed, because you're like, oh, didn't you know that Richard Doty said it was all fake? The guy said it was real, or he said it was, or whatever that is, right? And because of that, now people would rather believe that it isn't real anyway. So they're going to double down on that and be like, no, that was debunked. No, that was debunked. They'll say that. But you're like, was it though? I mean, I'd like to think that there is a seed of truth in all of these fantastic stories. And part of that is because I enjoy fiction, and I'm biased, and I hope that some of this is true because it sustains my creative thought process. But, you have to at least lend some credence to these stories, because some of the components in some of these stories show multiple sources of evidence, not saying the reptilians, but perhaps some actual secret underground project going on. You know what I mean? Like, so there are some things there that are worth at least keeping an eye on.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I think in anybody who's interested in this topic, I've been talking about it on and off recently, but if you haven't seen Mirage Men, you should watch it as a sort of counterpoint to all of this stuff going around that is pro-disclosure, just to be, Socratically rigorous and look at, okay, what is a like a critical thinking exercise to the counter of there being real disclosure, and because it shows you the levels of coordination and just I mean, honestly, man, the stuff they did to Benowitz was just cruel. And this and the thing that's too bad is he often is like, he
was mentally ill.
Yeah, and they made him mentally ill. Like,
he was already susceptible to that. So.
Yeah. But in his defense, he's often painted as like the quintessential psyopt guy, but he had a PhD in engineering. Like, this guy was legitimately very smart, and that's part of why they were worried about him. Like, he was looking at, signals and parts of the electromagnetic spectrum coming out of this classified nuclear facility they did not want him looking at. And he was also actually seeing anomalous craft. And man, some of the stuff they don't even say in Mirage Men, I found out later, like, dude, Doty and another guy would go into his house and move stuff around little by little to fuck with him. Like, the lengths that they went to just damage this dude's psyche and his perception of reality, we all, I think, would fall victim to that. And that's
stress inoculation, a lot of it.
Yeah. And that's what's so scary. Like, the hooks that you were talking about are, everybody's got them. Everybody's got them. Like, if you came along and told,
unless you're a psychopath.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, then your hook is like, oh, you're so smart. You're right. You shouldn't have been able to figure this out, but you figured it out. You really are great. But yeah, if you came to me and you're like, Michael, all this Western esoteric Platonic stuff that you talk about, you're not supposed to know this, but this is the exact map that we're using on the inside.
I knew it all along.
Yeah, right.
I was right all along.
Yeah. And again, I think this segues nicely into your POV as a magician, because as a magician, deception is like core to your toolkit, right? And not in a, obviously malicious way, but that's part of a successful trick, is like misdirection, deception. And I think this line gets really blurry when you start looking at people who do seem to so in Phenomena, for instance, Uri Geller is a core figure, at least in parts of that book, because he really, as much as some of those guys tried to distance themselves from him later on, he really seems to be legit. Like some of the results he was getting in these experiments at SRI, even in front of people who were non-believers, like there are accounts of a lot of these things. And with someone like this, who, half the population seems to think is a charlatan, and then the other half seem to be convinced that he's real, I feel like you would have a really unique perspective on people like him who are able to do things right in front of people, seemingly.
Yeah.
Like what? And I'm completely ignorant on how any of this tradecraft as a magician works. I especially have no idea about like mentalism and how that stuff works. But clearly right there, I mean, something like mentalism, that looks like being a psychic to me, at least. And
that's what it should look like.
Right. And without revealing any of your direct secrets, or like techniques, what are you looking for when someone is purporting to be psychic or to have those abilities? Like how do you ascertain the truth?
Yeah. I mean, okay. As big answer here. First I want to touch on how we talked about a little bit like Psyop, is made for this malevolent force, and that we use a lot of the same deception tactics within performing magic, or creating the framework of a magic trick, rather. And I think that's very conducive to a good magic trick, is creating, or is allowing the spectator to create their own framework of reality, suggested by us, but they have to feel like they've created it themselves, because that strengthens the trick, much like a psyop. If I tell you so-and-so such information is true or false, you're going to retain that until you do your own research. And by doing your own research, you don't know that I've implanted that website there. But you go to the website, now you're like, I'm going to look at this myself, and it says the opposite of what I said. And I did my own research, and it says the opposite. And I go, I guess you're right.
Yeah.
You don't know that I put that website there.
Right.
And that I compelled you to go Google it. And now that you've done your research, the psyop lasts longer. It doesn't fade away so much, because anytime someone says anything, you've done your research. And this applies to magic as well. In magic, we create something called it's like contrast. Essentially, your objective view of reality and what is happening, there needs to be contrast there. For the bigger the contrast, without becoming fantasy, the bigger the contrast, the more you can stretch that, the greater the reaction, the greater the moment of wonder or astonishment, right? That's stretching that. To help stretch that contrast, we allow the spectator to create the framework of their own reality through our suggestion. Handing them an object to inspect, to look at, it signals to them that, this object clearly is untampered, is if they're handing it to me. Right. And so your baseline becomes, this is a regular object, whether a spoon or, I don't know, whatever object you want to think of. So you think, this is a regular object. He wouldn't hand it to me otherwise. So already your baseline is, I did my research. I came up with this. I've tested it myself. And I know this to be a real spoon. And I'm not saying this is what Uri does, but I'm leaving you some breadcrumbs.
Sure.
So then, through misdirection, showmanship, suggestion, the spoon bends. Okay. As a magician, or as someone who, if there's someone out there that works in psyop, they'll do the same thing. You're engineering a memory. This is what I'm doing. As a magic trick, I am always engineering memory. This is what a magic trick is. There's the immediate wow and whatnot, and it's one of the reasons why magic in person is so much different than magic on video.
Right.
Because on video, you can rewind, you can zoom in, you're looking everywhere at once, you're not focused on one thing, and we rely heavily on misdirection, showmanship, and presentation, and suggestion, and all these wonderful things, so that your memory gets affected by what's actually happening. So I will do a trick. You will take that memory, and instantly, what you have compiled isn't what happened. Instantly isn't what happened. Instantly. Okay? Very, very important. So when I hear anyone, I don't care how smart they are, I've performed for rooms of 300 engineers.
Yeah.
And they have no explanation for what I did. Right? So magic, like, we work very hard to make sure that we've covered every angle, every variable possible, to leave you with no option but to say, to suspend your disbelief. You unwillingly suspend your disbelief. And so when you're doing it to someone very, very intelligent, well, that's a hook. Because I already know where you're looking. You don't care about story. You only care about variables that you can control. So what are those variables you can control? Well, you want to touch the object. You want to see me do it. There's all these, like, you want to be close. And then I give you the variables. I say, look, there's nothing up my sleeves, or like, look, or all these things, right? And all these are compounding in your mind and being like, no, he showed me this, he showed me that. Instantly after, when you tell a story of what happened, I know for a fact it isn't what happened. Instantly, okay? And it grows over time, as a psyop does. The thing is, you're going to lie to other people. You're going to lie when you write your book about it. And it's not because you're a liar. It's human nature. When I tell someone what just happened in that magic trick, I'm going to embellish it immediately for two reasons. One, I don't want the person I'm telling it to think that I'm stupid or gullible or easily fooled. Right? So when I say, he took the spoon, it was a normal spoon. He held it on the end of his fingers and he wiggled his hands, and the spoon bent and the part fell off the spoon. That was it. That's all he did. There are certain things that he did also that you didn't remember, but this is what you're saying, right? And now I go, yeah, but surely he did something with the spoon before. You go, no, he didn't. I swear, I checked. Did you though? And so we'll embellish a little bit to make it seem like it's more impossible, because we don't want to be made a fool.
Yeah.
Second, so we're going to, embellish the parameters. Secondly, I want you to feel what I felt in that moment.
Yeah.
And the only way I can convey that to you is by making it sound a little bit more impossible than it was, unknowingly. We do that through storytelling all the time. This is no different. So I see a lot of similarities between an experiencer and someone who's just seen a magic trick. These embellishments happen. They happen. It's human nature. You cannot say that they can't happen. And people can say, well, no, I wrote it down instantly. The time, you don't understand. Your memory has already been altered.
Right.
If I hand you something and say, this doesn't matter, your brain immediately deletes that information because it has no time. It's not going to store useless information. But then I say, look at this. This is important. Then you're going to go, boom. And now your 2 points of contact are the two important moments. And the moment that I said wasn't important is deleted, and your story becomes a little more condensed. Because you're going to delete those moments. And I engineered it that way. I made it because the really important moments are the ones that I threw away, that I told you have no importance.
Right, yeah.
And you followed me on that. And so your story is different from what happened instantly. And when I see people write about Uri Geller or any other feat, I know this. I know this to be a fact because I can do it. So although I believe in Annie's credibility and I believe in everyone else's credibility, I hold them to very high standards. I do not think myself above any of these people. I do know that we are all susceptible to that. And a magician's job is to make sure that you don't know that.
You're right.
When you start using magic tricks and passing them off as real gifts, the line becomes very blurred ethically.
Right.
And it's the reason why most magicians don't necessarily agree with Yuri, because of that ethical line. You've crossed it. You've used subterfuge, and you've used it for not only personal gain, you've used it to essentially inherently make people a bit dumber.
Right.
And, you want to leave people, your audience, feeling either the same or smarter. You don't want to sell them a lie, which is why if I do anything like this, any psychic demonstration, I will tell you right before, this is what a psychic demonstration would look like if it were real. And I'm going to demonstrate that. And now you're still going to feel all sorts of feelings like, how did he do that? What happened? But I'm going to remind you, this was a demonstration on an example of what it would look like if I was psychic.
Okay, let me ask you a question then. I've seen you, seemingly not in a magic capacity though, play with psychic things on your new channel, where it seems like, okay, whoa, that really seemed to be like a... I guess I'm asking you to spill the beans here.
So give me the example.
There was one example.
With the dice and Chrissy?
I think so.
Yeah. So if you watch that video again, right before I do the trick, I explicitly say, I said, she says, is this a magic trick? And I said, yes, but it's disguised as science.
Okay.
And then I proceeded to do the psychic thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I said that explicitly.
Okay.
And Chrissy even called me after. She was like, I can't believe like this stuff's real. And I said, what do you mean? And she was like, well, what you did was real. I said, Chrissy, watch the video. I said to you it wasn't real. And she goes, no way. I completely forgot that. And I'm like, I knew you'd forget it. Most people do, but I purposely said it so that you could go back and watch it.
Okay. So thank you for being straight up about that. The second thing though, is you do seem open to all kinds of these phenomena also potentially being legit.
Yes.
But are there ones where you're like, nah, like telekinesis or psychokinesis or whatever? Seemingly, again, there are examples in phenomena of Yuri doing these things under controlled, like heavily controlled, where he doesn't get to determine the target. He doesn't get to determine, whatever. Ingo Swann does the same thing where they take him underground and, they basically tell him I forget what this piece of technology is. It's some kind of quantum I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was like the only one that ever existed in the United States. And it's buried like in concrete underneath this lab to be isolated from electromagnetic frequencies and stuff. So they bring him down there and they're like, yeah, Ingo in this case. But there are some examples with Yuri for sure where they're like, perturb this device. And he's having trouble because he's like, I don't understand what I'm perturbing. Like, give me some idea so I can start to visualize something. And then, through a couple of different things, he's able to actually apparently achieve the result they wanted. And in front of very skeptical scientists that were like, holy shit, can you do that again? Because we can't accept that you really did that. And then he did it again and he left. And I think Hal Puthoff was trying to get him to do it again. And he's like, nope, that was it. I don't like performing like a monkey for you, like with stuff like this. But yeah, so are you open to those things, or are there certain things that you're like, nah, man, that's
both.
I know too much. Okay.
So the second part of that dice trick with Chrissy, I roll a dice and I have her write down what I rolled. That part was not a trick.
Oh, okay.
So, and that was an opportune chance to demonstrate a possible psychic connection. 1 in 6 chance. It was a dice.
Right.
So you can play it off the chance if you like. I'd like to believe it wasn't. And moments like that happen more often than not when playing with chance. And they happen.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm writing a thing on this right now, a talk that I'm doing at Psy Games about this. But miracles, these small miracles, tend to happen a lot for magicians. And it's so interesting because most magicians are very disenchanted, which is very ironic. We are the closest to actual magic, and we don't even know it. We play with odds all the time. And sometimes you can ask any magician. I swear to you, ask any magician, they will give you at least a story, if not 5, of a time where they performed and a miracle happened because they were feeling it and they just went with it. And it happens more often than not. And I have a bunch of stories myself. It's wild how it happens. And again, you can be like, that's chance. It's a numbers game. Sure. Then ask the same magicians how many times he took that chance and it didn't pan out. And there won't be as many stories. It's really that crazy. So I do accept that there is some type of that we have some type of access to this quantum field,
right?
When stupid confidence comes into play, or arrogant belief in something, and you just go with it. It's like a feeling, like you just know it's going to work. You don't hope it's going to work. You don't, and you just know there's all these other variables that apply themselves to these examples that I've noted, but that seems to be the main one. And stress.
Yeah.
In an environment where if it goes wrong, I have no outs, and you just go with it, and it seems to just kind of work.
Yeah. Do you know about the idea of morphic resonance or morphic fields?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. It could be something like that too.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing is, here's the thing with Yuri, is that he was never brought into the labs at SRI. He was brought into separate rooms at SRI. Hal Puthoff wanted to bring him into a lab multiple times. And he always wanted to control the parameters. Not so much as in, no, I want to control the parameters. They'd be like, okay, yeah, we'll do that later. But first, here, do this, hold this, look at this paper, think of this. And now he's controlling the parameters where it seems fair. Everything seems fair because you're handed the thing and he looked at the thing and he had Puharich with him who's setting it up. And And so it was the CIA's or SRI's frustration with Yuri that eventually led them to be like, okay, you can go back. We don't need you anymore. Because otherwise he'd be as studied as Ingo was.
Right.
Or as Joe McMoneagle was, but he wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I've spoken to Edwin May and I've spoken to Joe McMoneagle, they feel the same way. Yuri was never brought into controlled environments. Ever. So that's a misconception. And so everything now that I hear has to be taken with a grain of salt. Now, I'm not saying Yuri has zero ability. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying proceed with caution.
Right.
Because, when you know methods like this and you hear stories of people saying these amazing things, as a magician, this isn't foreign to me. I'm very aware. And so if, I was so inclined, I could perform psychic feats to people who are working in a lab under my own conditions, seemingly their own, because I let them create their own framework when indeed it's mine, and then perform these miracles with their phones or their objects, their ring that they have on or their watch, make it stop, like all these different things. And you would say, I performed in a lab to scientists and this is what happened and it's real. And so I'm very cautious with that. I'm not saying Yuri doesn't. I'm sure that there are some, I've seen examples of remote viewing and that type of thing. But again, when someone is aware of the methods, you actually have to question it.
For sure.
There's no reality where I don't question it. And for him or anyone like him to expect people not to question it is wrong.
Totally fair. Yeah.
We have to question it, especially when we know, like when Lou Elizondo comes onto the scene, who's a counterintelligence guy.
Yeah.
We have to question what he says.
And meanwhile, you still interviewed him in a very open.
Of course.
Yeah.
But we have to. It would be a great detriment not to apply that knowledge there when it's, so clearly evident. So in a case like Ingo Swann and Joe McMoneagle, see, that's where I go, well, that's interesting
Right.
because
Or-
I know the physicists that researched him
Yeah.
for them.
Yeah.
And I know the work that was put in and the parameters and the variables. And I know them not to be magicians.
Yeah.
And so now it's interesting. But as soon as Uri Geller's mentioned, I have no choice as a magician but to dismiss it
Yeah. Right.
entirely. Yeah, I have no choice there.
Yeah. Or like in the case of Pat Price, they tell the story in the book about how he got on their radar. Do you know that story? It's
No.
so fucking weird, dude.
Pat Price was wild.
Yeah, he seemed to be the one who was the best out of all of them. So I actually haven't gotten to the part of the book yet where even McMonagall even shows up, because there's this era at SRI that is pre Stargate, and this is when the CIA is really sort of kicking the tires, and this is before the DIA gets involved and that whole thing. But so Pat Price is involved at that point. So is Uri Geller to some degree, and so is Ingo Swann. And Pat Price just sort of happens to be selling Christmas trees at this place where like Hal Puthoff and like a couple other people go buy a Christmas tree. And he at that time sort of just somehow coaxes out of them like, hey, what do you do? And they're like, oh, well, we work on some interesting stuff at SRI. I can't really say too much. And then he goes, let me know if you ever need help with that. And they're just like, okay, so it's the implication is dude put himself in the right place to meet those people. And if that's true, that adds this whole, and he was, by the way, investigated because the circumstances around his being involved
So bizarre.
were just so weird that it was like, is this dude a plant? Is this dude? Yeah. Is this a Russian plant? Is this another agency plant? What is going on here? And then he, of course, has the ultimate what the fuck and has the weird death at the end of it all. That makes it even all that much more intriguing. But yeah. Anyway, yeah. So
yeah, but
go ahead.
Sorry, just to wrap it up, I do believe that there is something more. I just have a hard time believing it when I hear stories of a magician who says he's not performing magic, and still doing the same things he did when he was performing magic. Yeah, that's as simply as I can put it. Other than that, I know that miracles happen. I've seen them happen, and I think there is a link between the modern magician and magic with a K. I just don't think that magicians are aware of it. Most magicians are, like I said, disenchanted. A lot of them, most of them atheists, unspiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And they use all sorts of, like you said, like brands and stuff. They use sigils. They use these signs. Like even some of the tattoos I have.
Yeah.
In hindsight now, I'm like, oh, there's an energy there. There's an intent there. So I think there is more connection to ancient magic with the modern magician than magicians are aware. And I feel like it's incredibly ironic that the most disenchanted people are magicians.
Yeah, it is. It is. This idea
that methods, right?
Right. This idea that you brought up, man, really has me intrigued. This idea of there being some sort of link between a deception, but then creating some sort of psychical bubble where suddenly belief has been established in something, and it doesn't really matter what the reality that created the belief is. It's like the belief itself takes over and then exerts some control over the result of something, like a dice roll, seemingly. Yep. And that is so cool to me as somebody who's obsessed with the like trickster Hermes mercurial archetype, because he is associated with magic with a K. Like he is, Hermeticism, like all of the Hermetic magic lodges and stuff, like the Golden Dawn and all of that stuff. Like that figure is central to them. And there is this sort of walking between realms involved there. And that's very intriguing to me. That's very, very intriguing. I'm interested to see like what direction you go with writing about that and how you're going to try to.
I'll give you like a quick example. I've 1,000 off the top of my head from stories that people have sent me, magicians. I'm in touch with, all the magicians. So I get to ask them all. It's one question I ask every magician. Tell me about a miracle that happened. And they go, oh yeah. Okay. Which one? Hold on. And they'll give me an amazing story, like an unbelievable. You'll go, there's no way that this happened. This is lottery ticket odds in front of a crowd of people at a theater. How, one with me was I was in Bermuda performing for a group of people that we had just met. We were at a bar. There's a bartender. There's my friends, and there's this new group of people. And I was doing a passcode trick where I guess their passcode, the stranger's passcode to their phone.
Oh, dude, I was going to ask you specifically about an example like this because I saw a video of like somebody doing it to like Shane Gillis's friend or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, how is this possible? Yeah.
Yeah, that was Oz Perlman. Yeah, he's a friend of mine as well. So I take this girl's phone. Now, at this point, I can reveal that I already knew the passcode. Okay. So it's all, I'm sort of like, this whole like, think of your passcode, go here to imagine you're okay. I'm getting a 1, or like, that's all performance, right? The magician or mentalist, whatever you want to call it, already has the information at this point. So now that is a secret, how they get that information, that I won't divulge, but they have the information. They're not actually reading minds. So I have this information. Now I'm at the point where I can open her phone for presentational value. Sometimes we do, like, depending on what the passcode is, I might play off of that. So if I know the passcode, and let's say the passcode is all 1s, right? Instantly, this tells me that you're someone who needs to get into your phone really fast. It also might tell me that you're not in a relationship because you're and so it does tell me actual,
right.
Little pieces of psychology that I can pick up, and your body language and all this. And so I can use that in my presentation. So, before I divulge the passcode, I go, you're single, aren't you? And they go, yeah, how'd you know? You're like, I'm just getting a feeling. I'm like, you're someone who probably texts and drives. And they go, yeah, because you got to get into your phone really fast. And like just little information like this. And now it looks like I'm cold reading them when I'm actually hot reading or warm reading.
Right.
And eventually, I'll get into, oh, give me your hand. It looks like this, whatever. And they'll go nuts because I open their phone. This time I decided on a whim to try it a bit different. I like to experiment with how the reveal happens, just for my own experimentation and my own performances. So I say to her, okay, here's what we're gonna do. You're not gonna open the phone, but I'm gonna try and have him open your phone. And I point to the bartender, and she goes, okay. And again, I'm riffing. And at this point, it's like, I don't even know where I'm going, but if he doesn't get it wrong, I still know the passcode, and worst comes to worst, I can just punch it in, and it's still a cool trick. But this is me trying to play with miracles. I do this quite a bit. And so I go, I'm going to have him open the phone. And I said, all right, put in a random number. He puts a random number, 4 digits. Obviously doesn't open the phone. I said, that would have been cool. That would have been a miracle. They all laugh. Okay. I look at the bartender and I was like, and I go, put in your birthday. And he puts in his birthday and the phone opens.
Wow.
Internally, I am freaking the fuck out. Internally, I'm screaming because this is an actual miracle that just happened. But I look like the guy who knew it was going to happen, right? So I got to play it cool because I'm a magician, right? So because I said, hey, come do this, it looks like I knew that this was going to happen.
Yeah.
Which is, what are the odds?
That's insane, dude.
Yeah, it's insane. So I go, I'm trying to play it cool. And instantly I go, and she's freaking out. He's freaking out. They're all freaking out. And I go, you guys share the same birthday.
No.
And she goes, yeah. And they were both born. It was like the 9th of December. I forget what the number was or whatever. The same year, the same day. They both had the same exact birthday. They didn't know each other. And they both used that for their 4-digit passcode on their iPhone.
That's insane.
I could have pointed to anyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I could have not pointed and just done the trick.
Right. And see, this is such a good example too, Chris, of the bullshit law of large numbers thing. And the bullshit statistics that the skeptics in the comments, skeptics in the comments, like, well, because it's this and this, it's really not that big of a deal. It's probably a 1 and blah blah blah.
I pointed to someone.
Yeah,
I could have pointed to the person beside them. But there is the birthday paradox, where two people in 25 would share the same. You know this paradox. So there's
sure.
A room full of 25 people, two people will share the same birthday.
Oh, okay. I guess I didn't know that.
It's a paradox. Is it 25 or 50? It's a low number. It's an incredibly low number. But in a room of 25 people, the odds are, through this paradox, that two people share the same birthday. It's a wild paradox, but it happens.
Yeah.
You look into it. It's kind of wild.
So okay, I'm going to take an angular turn here, but
sure.
I already have a destination in mind, albeit not as sophisticated of one as a magician would have about to do some trick, because I'm just doing this on the fly here. But talking to you, now I do a 90-degree turn and go back to the psionic asset topic and ask the question, could that psychic bubble of expectation that leads to actual miraculous shit occurring somehow be related to psionic assets and the manifestation of something out of the sky? Because it really sounds similar to the same thing. Like you're somehow creating this mental construct around a group of people that has some kind of gravity to it, that has some kind of expectation, that has some sort of attraction that actually makes something occur in space-time in front of people. And I don't know how to talk about that in a way that isn't anything but theoretical and hand-wavy, because it's not like a cause and effect thing. It's not like do this and then this exact outcome will happen. But I think if there's any truth to this, which I obviously am warm to the idea of there being, that seems to be a prerequisite. It's like you're creating some kind of psychical portal that allows things like this to occur.
Right. And it takes the right ingredients. And, Bledsoe will say that too. Chris Bledsoe will say, if there's someone who's skeptic, it's just not going to happen. They won't see it. And it sounds so fitting. And so, you're like, oh, of course. But at the same time, you're like, maybe that is a key ingredient. Is this blind faith that it will, not even faith, stronger than faith. And this is something a lot of people talk about, the knowing that things are going to turn out, that it's going to be fine. You ever see those videos of somebody like, it's raining and they just go like this, they point, and then there's like the lightning crash at the same time that they point.
Oh, yeah. And
then they go, like they're Thor or something. I think it's that. I think it's a blind, and pardon the expression, but a stupid confidence. Like an unjustified confidence.
Yeah.
Like it's not confident based on stats or confident based on ability. It's just a stupid gut shot confidence of this is going to work out of nowhere.
Yeah,
Boom, let's go right here. Bam. And that's kind of what it is with magic. And what's so fun about the magic part of it is that often, as we spoke earlier, magicians have outs.
Yeah.
So we can actually play with this a lot more than regular people can without looking a fool. Because if it doesn't turn out, like I said, I would have just opened the phone myself. It's fine. And we have those outs. So we create a scenario in which we can play with magic in a safe environment where none the wiser. But ourselves, we get to actually perform miracles for us.
Yeah.
So sure, it's a great trick for everyone, but they assume it's going to be a great trick because I'm a magician. But for me, I'm screaming like a little child on the inside, being like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this worked!" And so I think applying that same energy would yield the same results, not just psionically with craft, but through manifestation as well.
Yeah.
I think it, sometimes you get a feeling of something or I just have to go here, and you just go with it. And who do you run into? Your childhood crush or whatever it was. Right. And these synchronicities start happening when you behave this way. And so living a life that is in that energy field or that psychical bubble, as you put it, I think is more conducive to things happening. And if you want to look at data, just look at that. I think it's more conducive. That's it. That's it. Hard to put numbers on it, but I think it happens more. And if that isn't something to like, you know, make you think if there's something there, I mean, I don't know what is. It happens more often than it should. That's all I can say.
Totally, man. Yeah, and there seems to also be something special in my experience, and I've read things to this effect as well, and I'd like to hear your experience with this too, as someone that travels a lot. There seems to be some unique energy around travel, or like going somewhere else where you're not just sitting at home, but you're like going out into the world and you're in an unfamiliar place, and weird, unbelievably coincidental or synchronistic shit happens when you're traveling. My most insane story about this, I've told it on the channel a bunch of times, so maybe I won't tell the whole story here. But when I was in 2019, me and my good friend Colin went to Peru and did ayahuasca together. There was this whole comedy of errors and flight issues and insane things. And then we both simultaneously had the most preposterously impossible synchronicity at the same time, where it was extremely relevant to what was happening right in front of him and right in front of me. And he was in a different part of the country as me when this happened. So basically, there's a whole synchronicity around roses where there was no reason for me to have anything to do with roses or him to have anything to do with roses. But at the exact same moment, and this is actually, I'm just doing a terrible job of like not really telling the story now. But basically what ends up happening is through a whole crazy set of circumstances, there's like something to do with roses right in front of me, something to do with roses right in front of him in a completely unplanned, weird fucking way. So I'm curious for you if you've noticed that more with traveling. And then also, quick aside, with what we were just saying with Hermes and Mercury, he's also the god of travel. So that's another.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that has to do, if we bring it back to the nature of psi, I think it's intertwined with survival. So if we go back to Joe McMoneagle and Edwin May and the study of remote viewing, the targets would always seem to be more clear, or the results were always better when there was a life at stake. When it involved children, when it involved nuclear war, when it involved hostages, or soldiers trapped in the enemy lines, behind enemy lines. And this all goes back to, ancient tribes.
Sure.
How'd you guys determine if this mushroom was edible? Did you eat it and die? No, we asked the mushroom.
Yeah.
And it told us, and so I think there is a key instinctive survival psychic ability within every one of us. Yeah. I think in some more heightened than others. And I think under certain circumstances can surface, especially when you have a gun pointed to you. And all of a sudden it feels like you can read the situation and time slows down, and you can read the person's mind, or you can communicate with the person beside you mentally, or you can see what's going to happen a second before it happens. Even in a fight, I spoke to George St. Pierre and he said, there's moments that he's like, is this deduction because of the thousands of hours I put into martial arts? Or did I just know what he was going to do based on instinct and psychic ability? Because when you got a fist being thrown at you, that's a bit of a survival mechanism there.
Yeah.
And so, you look at Jake Barber, what they would do is they would do stress inoculation. They would induce stress and then calm him down. So it's almost like letting go, but also being stressed. And that sort of balance plays into these things. Now, think about what you're doing when you travel. What are you doing when you travel? Well, a lot of it's stressful.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is also letting go, because you can't actually take care of anything that's going on at home.
Right.
You have to let go. So you're letting go, but you're also incredibly stressed, and you're watching your back, and you're constantly checking your bags, making sure you're not getting pickpocketed. You're in a little bit of a survival mode.
Right.
And it's in that moment that perhaps your psychic ability gets a little bit more enhanced or activated.
Yeah.
And then it's in that psychic bubble that perhaps these synchronicities start happening a little bit more. At least you're paying attention to them a little bit more because of that.
Good call.
So, maybe that's all sort of connected in a much more primordial way than we think. Maybe it has to do with just, knowing where to dig for water.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of two things. I spoke with this psychologist a while ago named Emma Sapala, and she is really interested in all things psychical, but she is has the most legit academic credentials you can possibly imagine, like PhD from Stanford, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, she was talking to me about essentially modern inheritors of military psi type stuff way before this Jake Barber thing dropped. And she was telling me, like, I know the officers involved in this stuff, and they can't tell me what they're doing, but I know they're doing something, and I know they're doing something in that arena. And she knows specifically, with what you were just saying reminded me of this specifically, is that with special forces, some of them do go through intuition training, and they specifically ask them to, like, recall times, like, how did you know, if you're in this firefight and you did or didn't do something, how did you know to do this and not to do this? And I remember McMonagle having a lot of stories like this too, where he was deployed in Vietnam and just, like, unbelievably awful circumstances where tons of people around him died and he didn't die. So yeah, that they're still doing that at a minimum, like this. And she told me the terminology for this, like this intuition training. And I can't recall exactly what it is now, because they love to have weird esoteric terminology for everything.
Always.
But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, just even the example you gave with Joe McMonagle, he attributes his survival wholly to his psychic ability. He says that very, very often, that if he wasn't as psychic, and he, although he had near-death experiences, and I've always, we've always linked near-death to triggering, something like that. But Joe doesn't. Joe doesn't think so. I tend to disagree, but how do you disagree with Joe McMonagle? He says that it was more of his instinct to survive when he was a child. Like, he had a abusive father, and had to protect his sister, I think it was. And so it was like more of like a survival that came from there.
Right.
That triggered psychic awareness, and that carried on through to his military, to his time in the military. So it is really, really interesting how, the most psychic people, will potentially be the people who survive war. And so if you were DOD, where would you look?
Yep. Yeah. Well, you reminded me specifically where I was going with the psionic asset stuff, because obviously this is part of the Jake Barber and weird relationship between his story and the Herrera story, which is the relationship between trauma, like traumatic initiation, and these psionic assets. And there's all of these foggy stories about stuff like this going on, where, so for people that don't know, there's this Michael Herrera story where there's this Marine, he's deployed in Indonesia, I think it is. He and and they're doing disaster relief, but then they apparently stumble across this, interestingly, another 8-gon UFO Vanta Black ship that has not aliens with it, but human beings that look American, have American weaponry, but also don't have any indication of branch of military or what they're doing or their status. And he thought that they were human trafficking for drug-related reasons or something like that. But then Jake Barber comes along and basically says, no, you misinterpreted that. Here's the real deal. Those were psionic assets. They were not being taken against their will. They were identified as people who had these gifts or whatever, and they are willingly, somebody getting
Stepping
on a
aboard,
fucking UFO
yeah.
or for some reason.
Yeah.
You
But
just
part of
get-
that was because of the trauma. Was that those children were affected by this natural disaster in a way that was very traumatic. I think in that was again one of the ingredients to making a good psionic asset. That, and probably my guess also is like, I mean, through hypnosis, you can bring people back to their childhood.
Hmm.
You can probably take a full-grown man and make him act like a baby
Yeah, for sure.
to end up, perhaps triggering a stronger psychic connection.
Well, here's a weird idea. What if you just hypnotized someone and told them they had psychic abilities?
Sure. That's interesting. There's a story. This is interesting. Who told me this? Was this? I gotta think. Who told me this? It was a hypnotist. I think this Chris Kenner told me this, like Copperfield's producer or something. And there was a hypnotist. He did like a birthday party, and he had hypnotized one of the guests, and he said it was multiple guests. It was like a mass induction. 5 people, getting them to quack like ducks, whatever it was. And on a whim, he told all 5 of them to sing the Martian anthem.
Whoa.
And all 5 of them sung it in unison.
Whoa.
And it was like it was a language that they'd never heard, but all 5 of them sung the same song.
You want to sing it on the count of 3?
Yeah. 1,
2, 3.
Glad.
Dude, I was thinking of a G. I was thinking of a G. Hey, I'll take it.
It was Glabber
I'll
Glorb.
take it. Yeah.
But yeah, they apparently that story is true. And so, yeah, I mean, I would assume, through hypnosis that you could probably access, some other, I don't even know, where to go with that, but I'm sure there is some access to something else through hypnosis for sure.
Well,
there's the past life regression and the between life regression stuff. And so, you would assume that, potentially other psychic phenomena is also accessible.
Yeah. Well, especially if you have somewhat of an ability already, like you have already played around fairly extensively with remote viewing. I'm sure you've heard these stories of people who are in comas and then they come back and they speak a whole new language or something. And I've seen a couple YouTube videos on this recently. And in both cases, it wasn't someone who was completely ignorant of that language, but it was somebody who had like very rudimentary abilities. So there was this Australian kid who took like a semester of Mandarin or something and was far from a fluent speaker. But he came out of his coma and there was a woman, a nurse who looked Chinese. And for some reason that triggered something in his brain where he's like, oh, I need to speak Mandarin to her. And then he just knew Mandarin like 100 times better than he did consciously.
Yeah,
so maybe,
and he couldn't he not speak English anymore?
Yeah. It took 3 or 4 days for him to get English back. Like they had to like he had to slowly get English back with his family. So maybe there's something, I mean, because that actually reduces the scope of the mystery to a level where it seems more likely is like, clearly, I grew up watching a ton of anime. Like I know levels of Japanese subconsciously that I don't know consciously, right? So that makes a degree of sense that the mind could be partitioned in these weird ways and that you can get around those partitions with hypnosis. Like now how far that extends, does it go into the like Jungian collective unconscious where you could literally just
the cloud?
Convince someone they have, hey, you can remote view. Tell me what's going on in these coordinates right now. Maybe. Or maybe if you have that ability to some degree, maybe you turn the dial up on it. I don't know.
I definitely think that during a hypnotic state, you're probably more receptive, to, it's like getting someone, it's like the Gansfeld effect, right? When inducing the Gansfeld effect, they've literally seen an increased ability to perform with psi abilities.
What is that again?
So they stick ping pong balls on your eyes and they shine a red light on it. And then they play a frequency in your headset. And after about 15, 20 minutes, you cease to see red. It's just black because you get used to it. And you cease to hear the frequency. It's just not there anymore. And so this type of visual and auditory deprivation, our brains are wired or hardwired to detect change, even on, I think, a like quantum field level.
Yeah.
Which is why, you know, they've always had better success with remote viewing when there was entropy attached to the target. When they doused the target with liquid nitrogen, they would get more accurate remote viewings than if they didn't. Because I think on a quantum level, and we're just hardwired to detect change.
Yeah.
You know, and so if there's no change, what happens? It goes black. It goes black and you don't hear anything. Well, they've seen that during those inoculations and those sort of hypnotic states, it's right when you're about to fall asleep too. So it's right in that it's the out of body state. It's like all this weird little hypnotic state. In that, they've seen that the results were more accurate for things like remote viewing.
That totally makes sense. It's like you're putting yourself almost in some kind of like clicked out or state where your regular consciousness is just completely turned off except your awareness. And what's possible in that state, I don't know. But by the way, dude, in the Gateway paper, there's a part where they're talking about the sort of theory around the clicked out state that really made that make a lot more sense to me. Do you remember this from the paper?
I'm not aware.
So they're equating consciousness to being like an oscillating, you know, frequency. And I never really appreciated how much of this is based off this guy Itzhak Bentov's work, who wrote this book, Stalking the Wild Pendulum. Like
yes, I started reading that.
Yeah. If you read that and then go back to the Gateway paper, you're gonna be like, holy shit, this thing lives and dies by this dude's theories, basically. They do appeal to certain other like physicists like Pribram and Bohm and stuff like that. But so he just has one of the images in the report is like this oscillating frequency with two parallel lines, horizontal parallel lines for anyone just listening. And, you know, you have this frequency bouncing back and forth between these two lines. But then right near the top and bottom, there's this little, there's a second line. And that line is the clicked out segment of consciousness. And what they are essentially saying is that by doing Gateway and going back and forth between clicking out and not clicking out, it's almost like you're wearing the line down between that awareness that you have as a Chris, like I am metacognating, I am Chris, I'm going through life. And then you click out and it's just like nothing, right? But the more you go back and forth between that, you like slowly have some kind of portion of your metacognition that is like attached to the clicked out state. And that clicked out state is much closer to the quote unquote absolute.
To the source. Yeah.
Exactly. And that absolute is non-local. It's everywhere. It's nowhere. It's everything. It's nothing. And if you can learn to traverse those in between states of consciousness between you and the absolute, that's when you start to gain access to these other energy systems, probably,
and bring it into the physical.
Yeah, and or be able to have some kind of bring it back, right? Yeah. So that just, you don't just come out of clicked out states being in, that was nothing.
Time.
Yeah. I was doing a Gateway retreat at home, and it was the one they send you when you go home. Clicked out, came back, but when I came back, I was in this like field of luminescent geometry that was just like beaming at me. If you think critically, it's like, okay, that's where I was when I was clicked out, because that's where I was when I came back.
Yeah.
But I just don't remember. So then you start to understand, like, fuck, there's stuff going on in the clicked out state, but I'm just not conscious of it yet. And I think the more you do it, you poke little holes you know?
Do you ever wonder whether or not, like, there's a reason why we don't have access?
Oh yeah.
I think of that a lot. And the closer I get to the absolute through meditation or lucid dreaming or whatever it is, the more I'm like, there's a reason I think I chose this body as well. And it's so counterproductive for me to, in this body, try and go back to where I came from when I purposely chose this. It seems counterproductive to be like, what are you doing? Just stay here. You got to learn things. There's things for you to learn here. You'll get back to this. This is never going anywhere. It's always been here. You're going to get back to it. Don't worry. You've got a finite time here, like a really small sliver here, to learn as much as you can and to really, really progress in your soul's journey. And often I find myself so busy trying to get back, and then I have to stop myself and be like, plenty of time for that when I'm dead.
You're right. Yeah. I think there's definitely an important lesson in what you just said, in that like people can become absolutely addicted to seeking in altered states and just being so untethered from reality that they're just in this, like they become some kind of like new age caricature of themselves. And that's certainly a risk. But I also think that it depends on, that can inform who you are as a Chris in a way that it really allows you to help other people, other people who might be searching for just a tiny pixel of something more, feeling like so disenfranchised, so just disassociated from life, might be have like fallen down a pit of existential nihilism. And you talking about that could be the difference between who knows what in the most extreme circumstances. So
yeah, but also walking that line, I think is important. I think not falling off one end or the other. Because coming back from Gateway, I'm sure like you as well, I'm like, this is my whole life now.
Yeah.
Like this is the only reality I want to live in. And I'm like trying to get back to that reality constantly. It's like, it's almost like that, What Dreams May Come with Robin Williams, where he's like looking for his wife in hell and he goes to all these other places. I felt like, man, I need to get back there. That's where everything happens. That's the real. This isn't real. That's real. And like you said, I think I did pull away lessons from it that I can apply here, but I also have to be cautious to not pull all my lessons from it, because I think there are plenty of lessons here, for me to learn.
Absolutely, man. I think wisdom comes in various forms, and that's a kind of wisdom, but so is doing 100 push-ups, is like keeping your physical
reading
body. Yeah, absolutely. I think these are all things that to be, and this is why I am so interested in the branch of philosophy I'm interested in, because those people to me seemed like they were really living the well-lived life,
well-rounded.
Like Plato was a wrestler. He was like, his name actually refers to his physique. Like Plato means something like broad. So he was a physically gifted person. He was an educated person conventionally. He was clearly very interested in the metaphysical dimensions of reality. He was initiate at the Eleusinian mysteries. So it's like, I think that is what the well-lived life looks like to me, is somebody who has explored all of those things. And in doing that, you learn who you really are, and you get a glimpse at like who you are underneath the veneer of just being the physical you or the ego-based you or something.
Yeah, that's it's also, isn't that the whole point of yoga?
Yeah.
The unity and becoming a well-rounded individual.
Yes.
And you look at elements as well, like it's all the elements together. Like, I spoke to Hakeem, he taught me about this, where it's like, some people are more like fire type or water type, but to be a well-rounded individual. He studied ninjutsu for 25 years, and he was like, to be a well-rounded ninja, you have to be at all elements. You have to learn from all the elements. You have to, you have to read, you have to go to the gym, but you also got to meditate and all these things. There's a comedian, I forget his name, but he had a bit which I thought was hilarious. But he's like, when you see people that are like jacked at the gym,
Mm-hmm.
you should be like, all right, that's enough for you.
Yeah, right.
Now go read a book.
Right.
Become a well-rounded individual. You've conquered this. You know what I mean? Now you're just padding your stats. So it is something to, it's inspiring to know that I have an entire universe to explore in this incarnation, that it isn't, I don't put myself in a category of, oh, well, I'm just a bodybuilder, or I'm just a this, or I'm just a that. It's so inspiring to know that, man, I don't have enough time to learn everything and to do everything, to see everything. And like you said, that's one part of it, is exploring the astral.
Yeah.
And then once you've done that, I'm like, all right, cool. That's there. Now, maybe on to, making a difference somewhere,
Yeah. That's what it means to be a well-rounded ninja.
Yeah.
But before we wrap this and we get like way too far away from it, when we were talking about the relationship between creating these mental, I don't know, attractors or whatever, and it seems like those things operate across multiple disciplines. It also made me think of, I talked to this author, Anthony Peake, recently, and weird coincidence, he's also he goes to Contact in the Desert like every year, apparently. And this is just after I had gotten an email asking me if I wanted to go. So I was like, dude, the book I read by him was way more down the Western esoteric, and also matching that up with neuroscience and physics, kind of honestly very similar to the Gateway paper and its sort of approach, this multidisciplinary approach. But just on a whim, and because it's such a popular topic, at the beginning of the episode, I'm like, hey man, like, do you by chance follow everything going on with UFOs? He's like, yeah, I go to Contact in the Desert every year. But he has a really interesting take that harmonizes with this psi angle. And his take is that he thinks these crafts are what people in Western esotericism would call egregores. Do you know this term?
No.
So an egregore is actually relates back to kind of how we started this conversation, with there being these like clouds of psychic energy that emerge from groups of people. And like corporations have this, Area 52 viewers have this, viewers of this pod, like any group of people who's commonly plugged in to something are like feeding it psychically, and they're creating this, they're creating
metaphysical homunculus.
Exactly, right. But he was saying, he's like, I think when people are doing CE5, that's what they're summoning. They're summoning like a psychical object that is all of them and their mental energy collectively making something manifest. And he doesn't, he's not closed down to the idea of
nuts and bolts.
Yeah, nuts and bolts, or there really being other beings or other consciousnesses out there. In fact, he definitely suspects that there are. But that's an interesting and refreshing take that I think is worth considering, at least.
Definitely. I think there is some merit to that when you think of we could attribute the rise of sightings to more access to people talking about them, or does one feed the other? Right? Are we seeing more craft because more people are talking about them, or are more people talking about them because there are more craft, or like, does one not feed the other? And before these movies in the 50s started coming out with Mars Attacks and all these like weird space movies, we wouldn't see those things, and then we started seeing them more.
Right.
Are we creating them? Are we summoning them? Are we can just putting them into existence through our own collective, want or projection.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thought, and that same goes for like, I've thought about that, like ghosts as well. And, even the Mothman, or you look at a lot of cryptids. Is it because we're all collectively, we want Bigfoot to exist? Is that why he now exists? I don't know.
Yeah. That relationship between cryptids and the UFO thing is one of those places where I'm just like, again, I think anybody who's a critical thinker is like, I don't know, man. Like, but to dismiss it is not to think critically about it either. So it's, that's a weird angle to this. Have you ever seen any weird things on that tip?
Only photos.
Same. I've never seen anything super compelling in that.
Yeah,
regard.
I've seen photos of not a cryptid. I would say I'm pretty sure what type of NHI I know it is. But very interesting photo. If real, it looks real. I mean, metadata says it's real, so that's interesting.
Is this secretive, or is this something that's out there?
Yeah. No, it's not out there.
Okay.
It's not out there. It's pretty alarming, but it's also, I just don't want to be that guy that's like, oh, we can't show it to you. It's like, it's not mine to share. But hopefully, the person who has this will eventually get the permission to share it. I can say that. But you look at it and you're like, well, that looks like what they described, doesn't it? Yeah.
Crazy, dude.
Yeah. And there's like multiple. It's like in succession. Like there's movement, and so bizarre. I've seen that, and that's like, I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't know what to believe.
Yeah. Well, on the note of I don't know what to believe, isn't it convenient that we're getting a group of people who are claiming like, hey, don't believe us. We're going to make it appear. You're going to see it just in time for having photorealistic AI video, right? That is like like, I don't remember what Google's AI video system is, but my God, dude, the level that is at now, and this is public facing, is disturbing. Like, it's disturbingly accurate. Like, we're already past the uncanny valley and into the point of like, you can't tell, like, unless you're an expert or you like study a video, and then even then there would be probably false positives of mistaking something real for something fake, and
or not caring. It's desensitizing as well.
Yes.
When you think about it, like, at first a lot of these videos would fool my grandparents, and then they'd fool my parents, and then they'd fool people my age, and then eventually they'd fool people younger than me who are more knowledgeable on this. And then they would see the real thing and they would go, that's AI. And you go, no, it isn't. And they go, meh.
Right.
Because they're so desensitized, and they've been seeing things that are indistinguishable from reality, to now when you see it on video, it doesn't faze you. It wouldn't faze you. It's essentially the same thing. So how could it faze you? So there is a desensitization that is happening with this AI that I think is kind of pro-disclosure, even though some people would think it's anti-disclosure and false narratives and disinformation. I think there is something to the desensitization of people towards UAP and NHI. If we look back at videos, this is a known tactic, but if there was a video in the past of an alien interview that was real, and we said it was fake the whole time, and the FBI said it was fake, and then all of a sudden they say, oh, that was real, by the way, we wouldn't freak out that much.
Right.
There would be desensitization to it. We've already ran the scenario, what if, in our heads, and we've had time to sit with that. So now it's like, whew, okay, it lessens the blow. So I think there is something to be said about AI actually helping us come to terms with what this stuff is versus it being a detriment.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, it seems like that this has to be woven into, if there is any kind of legit disclosure going on, this has to be a part of it. Like this slowly associating us to the idea, even if it's like indirect, like even if it's like some kind of like 100th monkey approach, right? Because I'm sure you have many people in your life who just like glaze over the instant you start talking about this. They're not interested whatsoever. Like, even those people, through their tepidness and disinterest, are getting used to the idea slowly, because like, oh yeah, people are talking about this, maybe it's real, maybe it's not. And if it's real, they're already kind of running that scenario in the background of their unconscious. And yeah, I think that if there is any reality to this, which it's, God, man, it seems like there is. The last question I'll ask you, though, is one that I'm always plagued by whenever I'm really thinking hard about this, is the why now of it all. You know, is there some event that they know is coming down the pike, that so that they have to roll it out? Is it a convenient misdirection for some other world event or some other technology that they absolutely have to take interest off of? Like, do you have any instinct on that?
There, the idea of this like 3-body problem scenario has definitely popped into my head, especially with, multiple people who start talking about certain dates.
Right.
I don't believe those dates are accurate at all. I think that those are probably just educated guesses. But I do believe that certain people believe that there is that, that scenario is a possibility, and that it's a bit of a race right now to catch up. That is one of the cool scenarios that I keep playing in my head, and I say cool,
yeah, yeah,
incredibly traumatizing if true, but cool as in like from a fictional standpoint, like story wise, it's a pretty cool story. But I also like there's a podcast, the UFO Rabbit Hole. And they just released their final episode, and where the host said, because they're moving on to Cosmosis, a different podcast, but the host said she was done with disclosure, and and she said something that stuck with me. She tweeted it, and it was something along the lines of, there's a difference between disclosure and ufology. And she's done chasing disclosure and back to ufology. And I think that's wonderful. I think we've been so sideswept with the figureheads that are put in place to, start this movement of disclosure, and the people who we should be asking questions to, and the people who we should be trusting, and what documentaries we should be paying attention to, when it's disenchanted this idea of ufology. It's really taken the magic away and made it, militarized it, made it nuts and bolts, made it about bureaucracy somehow.
Oh yeah, we got to wait and see what Congress says. I don't know.
Like what amount of paperwork matters here? It's just stupid. And so I get swept up myself in the idea of disclosure, because every now and then I'm like, oh yeah, this is good, they passed this law, and then I gotta shake myself out of it and be like, the hell, I don't need you to tell me nothing.
Exactly.
Disclosure is a personal thing. Everyone is going to have their own disclosure at their own time when they want it to happen. That's just the fact. It's just it's a lot like faith or belief or anything else in the world. It's all about what you want to believe. And you're not going to get that from a documentary. You're not going to get it from scripture. You're not going to get it from a redacted file being slid across the desk. It's going to come from within you and your own experiences, which makes me want to dive deeper into the UFO field and look at the amazing stories that there are there, and the uncountable amount of sightings, and the documents, the lore, and the false narratives and the true ones, and what if, and look at this footage. I think it's wonderful. I love ufology. I love UFOs. I love the idea of NHIs being real. I love this magical existence that we live adjacent to constantly in our seemingly mundane lives. I love that we have access to that. And I'm starting to find myself very disinterested in making it all about creating governing laws around what I'm allowed to believe in.
Yeah, man. Well, that's the perfect note to wrap this on. As a beautifully impassioned. I love the childlike wonder embedded in that sentiment, and the reminder that it really does all come down to you, what you're ready for, what your experience is. fuck the bureaucrats and politicians and people who are like, well, maybe when we say, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You can potentially have it now. So thank you for that reminder. Thanks
Absolutely.
for doing the episode, my friend. It's always immensely fun.
Oh, absolutely, dude. This is a joy. It's always a joy to speak to you, and thank you for allowing me to have a platform on your channel and speak to your audience. I'm very grateful. Your audience is very kind and always, I read the comments afterwards. Are very supportive of you. So it's good. It's good to be in a place, especially in this space, that has, some semblance of empathy.
Well, definitely right back at you, man. You don't need me to tell you. You're absolutely killing it. Your channel is the shit. It's one of, if not the best channels on this topic that exists. And you made it happen.
Appreciate that.
You made it happen just out of nowhere.
Thanks, Michael.